Now then, you lovely lot, welcome back to the Max Goodwin YouTube channel and another episode of our tier list series. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of the biggest breakout stars from across the last 12 months in world football. These aren't just limited, of course, to Premier League players. There's a couple of players from the French League, the German League, Premier League, Spanish League, Dutch League, all over Europe basically, and this is a collation of about 20 of the stars who I think have made the biggest impact this year. Of course, I will have missed some of the biggest stars in world football at the moment, and thus I suggest that if you think of anybody who I've missed in this list, do put them down in the comments below, because I'm sure we'll be able to collate a list of another 15 to 20 players to do for a part 2. Now, the only parameters for this list are that the players are about 23 or under. I think the youngest is about 17, 18, and that they made a pretty good impact in 2020 and going through into this season. There's no Mbappe, no Haaland or Marcus Rashford, players like that basically who everybody knows is going to be a superstar in the future. These are predominantly players who have made a pretty good impact, but maybe aren't being as talked about as much as some of the other stars in world football at the moment. Before we get into that, please be sure to drop a like on the video if you enjoy it and subscribe down below, turn in on notifications so you never miss a Max Goodwin video. Got some great content coming out over the next few weeks. We've managed to get a video every day for the last week, which I've got to say was a huge effort, but hopefully justifies the effort being put into the channel at the moment. So if you enjoy the content, please subscribe down below, because you'll definitely won't regret it. The content coming out at the moment is absolute brilliant. So we're going to be ranking these players based on the actual season during their breakout season, and also based upon how I think they'll be in the future, whether I think they'll be a world-class player or a complete legend of the game, or whether I think it's just a flash-in-the-pan season. We're going to be using the usual sort of trademark SABC bin, obviously S being the highest bin, B being in the middle, and bin being at the bottom. Without any further ado, let's crack straight into the list for this episode. So the first player we're going to be taking a look at is young Mason Greenwood from Manchester United, probably one of the more well-known players on this list. Obviously, everyone knows that during 1920, I think he scored about 10 goals in the Premier League and about 20 goals in all comps in a real breakout season for himself, and this season has continued some of that form over, certainly not as potent as he was last season, but still not too bad. So his stats this season read as 2 goals and 1 assist in about 800-ish minutes so far. He's firing off about 1.8 shots and 1 dribble per 90, as well as 0.35 expected goals and assists per 90, of course. Expected goals and assists being the probability of goals being scored from certain positions. So, for example, a penalty is 0.8 expected goals because there's a 0.8 chance out of 1 of that goal being scored, basically. I would suggest that you look at places like StatsBomb and Football Daily as to explaining expected goals a bit better than I probably can. So yeah, Mason Greenwood, I'm leaning more towards the A's. I think his breakout season was exceptional. Obviously scored a lot of goals in a very productive Manchester United attack. A lot of that was down to the arrival of players like Bruno Fernandes and Marcus Rashford coming into possibly the form of his career and being able to set up these chances for him. I think off the right, he definitely poses a threat, being very direct goal threat off the right hand side. I would like to see him potentially play down the middle. I think the introduction of Edouardo Camavinga has slightly halted his progress, and why I think it would be hard to put him in the S tier. But certainly off the back of this season and off the back of last season and this season having just happened, I feel like an A tier is a pretty sound place to put him. And I think he'll definitely be a star in that Manchester United team in the next 2 years. I'd be very surprised if he wasn't. Okay, our next player is Phil Foden. Everyone obviously knows he is probably the starlet in English football at the moment, I'd imagine. I'm going to pop him for the S tier just to sort of start off with. Of course, last season was basically his breakout season, although he's featured a little bit in 17-18 and 18-19. He has 5 goals and 3 assists in the Premier League, I believe, alone this season in about 1,000 minutes. 1.9 shots and 1.7 dribbles per 90, which is obviously pretty good stats, and 0.63 expected goals and assists per 90 minutes. They are up there per 90 stats wise, definitely one of the promising young players in English football at the moment, and I don't doubt that in the next 12 months he won't assert himself as one of the first names on the team sheet for Manchester City. He's already possibly been their player of the season so far, alongside Kevin De Bruyne. Definitely in for a shout of the Young Player of the Year award when it comes to the PFA awards at the end of the season, and potentially even with a shout of the Senior Player of the Year, to be honest. I think he's been an absolute revelation for City. When they've struggled offensively at times this season, I think he's offered that penetration from a deep area and also from a wide area. And I definitely think that he is the future of that Manchester City attack, should they end up losing the likes of Kevin De Bruyne, Sergio Aguero, Raheem Sterling, obviously, of course, when they age out of the squad. And I think that Phil Foden will naturally fill that role either on the left, the right, through the middle, or from a bit of a deeper position, such as Kevin De Bruyne does. Our next player is Gabriel Martinelli. Of course, his breakout season was towards the beginning of last season, and he has since come back into form at the beginning of this season. A large part of this was down to the fact that he missed about a year with a knee injury. Obviously, horrendous to see anybody get a horrendous knee injury in football, let alone such a young player with such a bright future. I do feel like we've not really seen enough of him as a player yet to justify his S or an A, or at least if he was an A, it would be a low A, maybe a B. I think it's quite hard to say he's going to be an S player or an A player based on the breakout season that he's had and based upon how he's going to be as a final finish player, just simply because he's not played enough minutes this season. He's only made a few appearances this season, and during last season when he was really breaking out, I think he only ended up making about a dozen appearances for the club due to having the injury later in the season. But that being said, I think we need to put him in the B tier. Probably a high B though, and I could definitely see him moving up towards the A's towards the end of the season if during the Europa League run and during the cup run in the FA Cup he can really get some minutes together, maybe get like 1,000 minutes together and a few goals, a few assists. You could definitely see him pushing up into that A category in terms of breakout stars in the Premier League at the moment. Our next player on the list is Edouardo Camavinga. His breakout season was last year, where he made some really hefty contributions to a very good Rennes team, finishing in a good position in Ligue 1. He also made his France debut and scored on his France debut, I believe, becoming the youngest player to do so in, I think, about 100-ish years. So obviously a very impressive display during last season. And this season he's really kept up that form and become an integral part of that Rennes team going into the back end of this season. He puts up about 3 tackles and interceptions per 90, as well as 1.5 dribbles, being a really effective box-to-box midfielder. And this season he's really improved his possession game. When he's on the ball, he's definitely a lot more decisive with it, passes a lot better, likes to break the lines with both his dribbling and his passing. And that's shown getting a goal and assist already so far this season in Ligue 1. And I think this guy's going to be a genuine world-class talent. I'm going to pop him in the S tier, probably somewhere between the S's and the A's. I think it's quite hard coming out of the French league to justify him being anything, being like this sort of next Ballon d'Or winner, because of course sometimes the French league is a little bit soft at times. But he's doing an exceptional job, has obviously established himself in the international setup as well. And for such a young player to have done that, I think is an exceptional feat for himself to have achieved. And I certainly don't doubt that he'll become one of the defining defensive box-to-box midfielders in the next decade and a half, which I'm sure he'll be at the very top of his game for. We now take a jaunt from France to Spain and to Barcelona. And our next player is Pedri of Barcelona, signing in, I believe, the summer from Las Palmas on the Balearic Islands. He's been very impressive so far this season. 5 goal contributions at about 0.5 expected goals and assists per 90. A very impressive haul so far this season. I definitely think he has been the bright spark in what's been quite a torrid 12 months for Barcelona. Of course, the financial issues that they've encountered, I think they're definitely going to have to overhaul their transfer strategy. And if it involves them picking up more players like Pedri, promising young players who've not necessarily had the chance to deliver on their promise so far because of injuries or because they've not had the minutes in the first team, I definitely think that would be a very clever thing for Barcelona to do. It certainly worked with Pedri, and he's really established himself as one of the featured mainstay players in the first 11 or even in the squad 18. And I think he's been really exceptional this season. You look at his highlights and the guy's very clearly very comfortable playing at this level. Of course, you're not expecting him to be completing 30, 90-minute matches per season, but at this stage of his career to be contributing at the level he's contributing so far, you certainly don't expect him to be anything worse than a squad player, maybe even a first-team player in the future. And so because of that, I think we're going to pop him in the Bs. Similar reason for Martinelli. I don't think we've seen enough minutes out of him to really get a full grasp of what he is as a player, whether he's a winger, an attacking midfielder, a forward. It'll be interesting to see as he develops under Koeman over the next sort of 12 months or so, where you imagine how long Koeman's going to be there for, whether he becomes one of his pet players and whether he can really develop him into potentially the heir to Messi. I think that's quite a hefty thing to place upon a player. And I think it's shown over the years how many players have been dubbed the next Messi, the likes of Xherdan Shaqiri and Freddie Adu, of course. But that being said, I do think it'll be interesting to see how Pedri gels into the squad. And I certainly think this is the best time for him to be doing so, because the team cannot get any worse. And so for him to be getting minutes in that squad, he's only going to get better over the course of the next few years. So yeah, a B tier for Pedri. And from beautiful Barcelona to beautiful Blackburn with our next player, that being Harvey Elliot. Of course, everyone will know him for being a Liverpool player. He's currently on loan at Blackburn from Liverpool, being the youngest player in Premier League history when he's made his debut for Fulham a couple of years ago. And has really proved himself at Championship level to be one of the genuine bright sparks in the Championship, one of the most impressive players to play in that league at the moment. His stats are also very impressive: 4 goals, 6 assists in about 1,500 minutes, firing off about 1.4 shots and 2 key passes per 90. Very impressive haul of stats. Obviously a player who is still very young, has a lot to prove, but I do think he, for that age, to be contributing what he's contributing is certainly not something to be sniffed at. I think it'll be interesting to see how he develops as a player, whether he even gets a shot in that Liverpool team next season should Salah leave. Of course, there's rumours that he's a bit discontented at Liverpool, and it'll be interesting to see, should the Egyptian leave, whether Harvey Elliot can then establish himself, maybe get some first team minutes in the team next season. And because of that, I think we're going to put him in the B tiers as well. I think because he's playing in the Championship, which of course of the leagues featured here is probably the weakest league, it's quite hard to say, oh, he's going to be the next breakout star for Liverpool, because we just need to see what he can do at Premier League level. So for that, I'm going to stick him in the Bs. No real sort of harshness or judgment against him. I think he'll be an absolute top player when it comes to it, and it'll be interesting to see how the rest of his Championship campaign really fills out and how he fills into the Liverpool team next season. I'll be very interested to see how he does that. Our next player is Ryan Gravenberch. He is, of course, one of the real sort of jewels in the crown of the Ajax team at the moment, a particularly good Ajax team, I should add. Erik ten Hag has really established a very dominant team in the Eredivisie so far during his tenure over the last few years, and I think Ryan Gravenberch has been one of the real success stories of his tenure as a manager. So far this season, 5 goal contributions in about 1,000 minutes, 3 tackles and interceptions, 1.5 shots, 1.5 dribbles. The guy does pretty much everything in the midfield. And I think it's very much a case of, because he can do a bit of everything, it'll be interesting to see whether he plays as a deep lying player, whether he plays a bit further forward as an attacking midfielder, whether he's a box-to-box player, whether he even goes even further, plays maybe out wide or up front. Be really interesting to see how Ten Hag develops him. He's very much a Dutch player in that sense. He's good at everything, proper total football player, can do a bit of everything on the pitch, as I've said a few times there. And I certainly think his future probably lies within the middle of the 3, in a midfield 3, in a 4-3-3. I think that's probably going to be where you get the best out of him, where you get a bit of everything out of him. You get the defensive work, you get the penetrative runs from midfield, you get the dribbling ability, and you get quite clearly a very good attacking player, a player who can create chances. A goal contribution every 200 minutes in the Eredivisie from midfield certainly isn't something to be laughed at. A player who's, 20 years old, 21 years old, and I certainly think has a very bright future ahead of him. And so for that reason, I think we need to put him in the A's alongside Mason Greenwood, simply because he's had that sustained period of minutes in the squad so far this season and has really showed himself to be one of the breakout stars in the Eredivisie and potentially in world football. And I think it'll be interesting to see where his next move is, whether he goes to Barcelona or Bayern Munich. I definitely think the Bavarians will be an excellent signing, simply because you're gonna get a very similar education as you would at Ajax. He's gonna play all across that midfield, and they'll eventually find his perfect fine-tuned position eventually. Or maybe Borussia Dortmund. That would actually be quite an interesting one. Get him alongside the likes of Sancho, Bellingham, and Haaland. Next player is Callum Hudson-Odoi, who of course his breakout season was kind of like the back end of Sarri's reign towards the beginning of Lampard's reign, and now in the 2021 season, he's really starting to break out again and establish himself as possibly the best attacking player so far this season at Chelsea. 4 goals, 1 assist in about 600-ish minutes, 1 shot, 1.4 key passes. His stats aren't amazing per 90, but they're certainly not bad. And I think in a team that has struggled a bit offensively this season, hasn't quite gelled with all the signings, I definitely think it'll be interesting to see how he develops in the next few years. So I think with that, we're going to put him in the A tier. He's definitely had the last 2 years to really develop, and I think you can definitely see the trend from him being this quite raw attacking winger who was linked with Bayern Munich, of course, before signing that contract extension, to now being a bit closer to the finished article, a bit more of a refined player, a little bit better judgment. You've obviously seen that with his 4 goals in all comps this season. And I think it'll be interesting to see again, much like these players, how he develops under Frank Lampard, whether Lampard utilises him on the right, on the left, or whether he uses him from a bit of a deeper position. It'll be interesting to see, because he's definitely a player with a lot of upside, and I think that versatility across the front line will definitely suit him in the long term. Our next player is Rodrygo from Real Madrid, of course signed from the Brazilian league for about 30 million euros in the summer of, I believe, last season. Had a bit of a breakout season last season and has now become one of the more established attackers in the Real Madrid side, alongside the likes of Vinicius Jr. 1 goal and 5 assists in about 700 minutes so far this season. 0.75 expected goals and assists per 90 from 700 minutes. If he can get that up to about 1,500 minutes by the end of this season and still be putting up that level of stats, it'll be really interesting to see him become probably one of the first team players in that team you'd expect, because, you know, the stats he's putting up certainly justify him being one of the more important attackers in that team. I know he's been in and out of the squad this season. I think he's had a couple of injuries. Much like Vinicius Jr., I think the bedding in period is going to be a long road rather than them just chucking him in and expecting him to contribute immediately. And I think that's definitely benefited the Brazilians, both he and Vinicius, and it'll be interesting to see that development. I think much like the rest of these players who are getting, you know, sort of 100 to 1,000 minutes, you've got to put him in the 80. His breakout season last year and this year has been amazing. And he's definitely looking like one of the real stars of that Real Madrid team. And it's interesting that they've gone for a real change of model. Obviously, they brought in Eden Hazard last summer, but then they also have had the likes of Vinicius Jr. and Rodrygo come into the team as young players and really become established. And Militao, of course, as well, from Porto, going for younger players who are less established but have a really good, you know, price to buy for them. Good sell-on value, and can at least contribute as squad players for the next 18 to 24 months. The next player on this list for me has been one of the absolute breakouts of the last 12 months. Absolute revelation for Dortmund, that being Giovanni Reyna, or Gio Reyna as he may be called. 15 games so far this season, about 1,000 minutes in which he's contributed 3 goals and 4 assists, 1.85 shots and 1.5 key passes, with about 0.35 expected goals and assists per 90. Really, really fantastic stats. He's not just contributing in dribs and drabs when he's getting chances. He's contributing week in, week out, and become one of the most efficient and really integral players within that Dortmund system, particularly with the likes of Sancho having a bit of a drop-off and Haaland having a couple of injuries at the beginning of this season. I definitely think he's taken up the mantle as definitely one of the best players in this, you know, tier list so far. And I think we've got to put him up alongside the top, alongside Mason Greenwood. He's been a real revelation for Borussia Dortmund, and I think I'm quite impressed with actually how easily he's adapted to the Bundesliga at such a young age, to have come in and to have been a real contributor at such a young age. Obviously, they have players like Yusufu Moukoko, I think his name is, the youngster who was just literally turned 16, already scoring for Dortmund. Haaland, Sancho, Bellingham, Akanji, young players who can contribute hefty amounts during the season, and I think Reyna is possibly even more than that. He could possibly be one of the most important players in that Dortmund team at the moment, certainly with how they've had a bit of a torrid start to the season so far. Our next player, as we jaunt back from Dortmund to London, is Bukayo Saka of Arsenal. Very much like Reyna, I think he's been one of the breakout players of this season so far. Very impressive stats so far, 15 games, about 1,200 minutes, which is already 3/4 of what he achieved last season. 2.4 shots, 1.2 key passes, which includes 3 goals in the Premier League and an assist. 0.42 expected goals and assists per 90. Very, very nice. I do like to see that. Very hefty amount of stats. Good amount of minutes to have got them in as well. You can definitely see that that's a level he can maintain, of course, across the campaign so far. Of course, 1,200 minutes is quite a lot of minutes to have attained at this stage of the season already. As I said, it was already 3/4 of what he's attained in the last season, and he's playing in his more preferred position. I definitely think out on the right is his best position. It was interesting to see him playing as a left back, a left wing back, a left winger, an attacking midfielder. I do think personally right wing, as I said, is probably his best position. It allows him to cut in on that left foot, and he lets Bellerin come inside as well. And that threat on the right hand side alongside, like I say, Bellerin is very, very unique in the Premier League, and I think he's going to be a very definitive player of the next sort of decade for Arsenal. I do hope he really gets his chance in the squad and that he really does become one of their most important players, because I do think when he's on the pitch you can tell he's one of the most captivating players on there. He's easily been their best player this season, and his progression from midfield into attack and then his development from basically a left back to a right winger over the course of the last 12 months has been exceptional, and that is something you've got to credit Mikel Arteta for, because he's really bedded him into the squad and turned him into a first team regular. So because of that, we're going to stick him in the A tier as well. I think he's probably going to go alongside the likes of Ryan Gravenberch and Mason Greenwood as sort of these breakout stars who are really starting to contribute meaningfully in terms of goals and assists so far. The next player is someone you may not have actually heard of. His name's Florian Wirtz. He plays for Bayer Leverkusen, and he's actually been essentially the replacement for Kai Havertz in that midfield. He's played 13 games so far this season with 1,000 minutes, which is already twice as many as he put up last season. 1.28 shots and 2.2 key passes, which have yielded 2 goals and 4 assists, which averages out at about 0.43 expected goals and assists per 90. So he's looking very similar in terms of output to Bukayo Saka, playing in a more central position in which he plays quite high up, I believe, quite close to the striker. And I think in that Peter Bosz system, the attacking midfielder is obviously very integral to the link up between the midfield and the attack. And I think he's doing a very, very exceptional job of doing that, replacing the output of Kai Havertz. Maybe he won't be as good as the German, but I certainly think that he's looking like one of the real breakout stars in the Bundesliga this season. I was really encouraged when I got this idea for a tier list to get him in here because I think he's really been exceptional. And so because of that, I think we're probably going to put him towards the low A's. Maybe even a top B, simply because he's only really had the minutes this season, about 1,000 of which have come in the Bundesliga. And he has been pretty good, I've got to admit. But it's just, maybe at the end of the season you sort of put him up towards the higher A's when he's had a full season under his belt. But considering he only contributed in dribs and drabs last season and this year has only really just established himself as a first team player, I think it's hard to say anything higher than a low A for now. We're now down to our final 5 players, the first of which is a career mode favourite. If you've been watching the Nottingham Forest career mode, you may know about this guy and the next guy on this list. His name is Adil Aouchiche. He's a French midfielder who came through the PSG Academy and recently departed on a free for Saint-Etienne, where he's absolutely torn up Ligue 1 so far this season. He's put up about 1,000 minutes in which he's played pretty much all over the park in the midfield and the attack, although predominantly he does like to play on the left-hand side of a midfield or as a left winger or as a left attacking midfielder, of course. And in those 1,000 minutes, he's put up about 1 shot and 2.1 key passes per 90, which averages out about 2 goals and 3 assists across the course of the campaign, which is a very impressive contribution. 1 goal or assist every 200 minutes, which is a very impressive feat, I would say, from midfield. He's played all across the midfield. His defensive stats aren't the best because he's played as a winger, he's played as an attacking midfielder, and he's played as a central midfielder, and I think that is indicative of the positional versatility that the Frenchman offers, and I think it's definitely something very interesting to see, very much like Gravenberch, where he settles in the end for Saint-Etienne, wherever he ends up in the next couple of years. So in terms of position, I am not sure, because 1,000 minutes is all he's done, basically. He didn't make very many appearances for PSG. I don't even know if he made any. And so 1,000 minutes, I'm going to probably put him in the Bs, towards the sort of middle of the Bs, alongside the likes of Pedri, Harvey Elliot and Gabriel Martinelli. He's contributed heftily this season. He's been very impressive in a pretty average Saint-Etienne team. But with that being said, he definitely hasn't contributed for a very long period of time, such as the likes of Gravenberch, Bukayo Saka, Greenwood, Foden, Camavinga, players who've been sort of on the peripheries of the team for the last couple of years. So I feel like a B is fair to what he's offered this season. Okay, so our next player is another career mode favourite. His name is Romain Faivre, or Favre. I think it's Favre because that's how I've heard people pronounce it. I can actually speak French. So Favre is what we'll call him. 1,600 minutes in 19 games this season for Stade Brestois. He has been probably their best player this season, and really that's a lot of minutes to have attained so far for one team in the league. So Favre has put up about 19 games so far this season and about 1,600 minutes already. That is a very meaningful contribution in which you can very much get a justified and very informed opinion on how good a player is, and I definitely think he is a very, very interesting prospect. 22 years old, 2.3 shots, 2.2 key passes, and about 2-ish dribbles per 90, 4 goals, 3 assists in the league, which is exceptional. Averages out at about 0.45 expected goals and assists per 90, as well as 3 tackles and interceptions per 90. The guy is a machine on the right hand side. He is a right midfielder, he's not a right winger, he's definitely better playing in like a 4 block in the midfield, where he's playing as a right midfielder, basically doubling up with his fullback, breaking out on the counter-attack. And I think a team like Southampton or Wolves would definitely be aggrieved if they didn't look at this guy. I think he's going to be an exceptional talent coming out of the French league, and he's definitely contributing a hefty amount for such a young player. And I think I think the stats are exceptional. However, he is 22 years old. He's a little bit older. I believe he's the oldest player in this team. And because of that, I don't think we can put him any higher than maybe a low A. He's been exceptional this season, don't get me wrong, and his stats are obviously incredible, and he's put them up in a good solid amount of minutes. But he's 22 years old, and he's sort of a few years away from his peak years. And I do think if he really has to get a move this summer if he's looking like becoming a sort of next tier player in the world stage. But I do think he's definitely got the potential to do so. He came through the Monaco Academy and has, like I said, provided meaningful and significant contributions in Ligue 1 this season for Brestois. So yeah, I think a low A is very much justified for the Frenchman. Our third to last player is Ansu Fati, who's put up about 500-ish minutes so far this season. 3 shots and 1.8 key passes, average out at about 0.78 expected goals and assists per 90, with 4 goals and 0 assists. Pretty good. A goal contribution pretty much every 100 minutes is very much, acceptable. Very acceptable at his age, in fact. And I just think because of the lack of minutes so far this season, I think he's had a few injuries. You can't really justify him going in the S tier. A tier perhaps because he really did break out last season and had a really good season last year. I'm not fully convinced that he is the next Messi in that team, whether he's going to be the next player to carry them forward for the next 15 years or so. I'm sceptical slightly just because I do think he's still quite raw, and he definitely needs a lot of work on his creative side of the game. He's definitely more of a shot monster than a creative force in that team. So he definitely has a lot of learning to do. So I do think, solidly in the A's alongside the likes of Hudson-Odoi and Rodrygo. I think that's a very fair place to put the youngster. He's contributing a lot, and don't get me wrong, he's going to be, I'm sure, an exceptional player for Barcelona across the years, but he just needs to get that rawness and slight rushiness out of his game to then become that next tier of player in the next few years, hopefully. Our penultimate player is a youngster from Stuttgart who themselves are having an absolutely exceptional season and have really bedded in some very young players into their team. Of course, if you watch the career mode, you'll know about Mateo Klimovich, who has become a real fan favourite in the career mode, and I've been very impressed with his contributions. He came from Stuttgart. But they've had some really good signings over the course of the last few years, and one of them has been Tanguy Coulibaly. He has come from the PSG Academy, and he's really become an integral part of that team. 14 games so far this season, 6 of which have come off the bench with about 700-ish minutes. He scored 2 goals so far, and his stats read as 1.5 shots, 1.2 key passes and 2 dribbles per 90, with an expected goals and assists ranking per 90 of 0.47, meaning he contributes to a goal or an assist every other game, which I think is a very impressive feat for the youngster. Definitely coming out of the Bundesliga as well. I think he's one of the breakout young stars in the Bundesliga so far. I do think, though, because of the lack of minutes, it'll be interesting to see how he develops, so I don't think we can put him any higher than really a B, just because we've done the same with the likes of Pedri, Aouchiche and Gabriel Martinelli. Because of that lack of minutes, I don't think it's really possible to put them any higher than that. And so because of that, we're going to put him in the Bs. Towards the top of the Bs, though, I definitely think he's going to be an absolute star in the making. I just think he needs another season in the Bundesliga before getting that big move to probably like a Borussia Dortmund to replace Sancho in the summer should he leave. I think that would be a very, very exceptional and very justified replacement. Let's move into our last player. Final player on our list is Emile Smith-Rowe. Really a player whose breakout has been in the last few weeks, to be honest, and he was really the inspiration for this tier list as a whole. 400 minutes so far this season. It's not a lot, I understand, but his stats do read pretty impressively. 2 goals and 4 assists in all competitions, 2.3 key passes, 0.8 shots per 90, with an expected goals and assists ranking of 0.5, meaning as well, like Coulibaly, he contributes to a goal or an assist every other game, and he presses a lot. He's a very good presser, a very aggressive player, having played for Leipzig during his development as a young player, spending time on loan there, I believe, a couple of years ago. 400 minutes is obviously a real smidgen of numbers, and so I really think it's very hard to justify how good he's actually going to be in the end. But with that being said, I do think a B is very fair. I think it's definitely harsh to say that he's going to be any less than that. because he has contributed decently in those very few minutes he's received. It will just be interesting to see him maybe rack up maybe 1,500 minutes next season as a real first team regular, should they not choose to replace him with an attacking midfielder. I still do think he doesn't contribute enough offensively for him to bed himself in the long term, but I think even if he leaves Arsenal, I can see him going to, a Leipzig or a Bayer Leverkusen, or a team where he's going to be part, a great, where the team is greater than the sum of its parts, and where he can press, and his maybe lack of technical ability and lack of talent, that sounds horrible, where he can show that his energy and his pressing ability can prove him to be a real top player, is what I'm trying to say. It sounded awful when I said lack of talent. I didn't mean it like that. But I do think he'll be a very interesting player. He's definitely something in England that we don't maybe have as much of, which is as an attacking midfielder, someone who likes to come forward and press the back line alongside the striker, and he does a good job of it. So I definitely think he'll be a very interesting and unique prospect for Arsenal in the future. Okay, so this is our completed tier list. There's about 20 players in this of some of the biggest breakout stars and how I think their breakout season's gone and where I think they'll end up being in their future. At the top of the list in the S tier, we have Phil Foden and Edouardo Camavinga. In the A tier, we have Giovanni Reyna, Bukayo Saka, Mason Greenwood, Ryan Gravenberch, Callum Hudson-Odoi, Ansu Fati, Rodrygo, Florian Wirtz, and Romain Faivre. In the B tier, we have Gabriel Martinelli, Harvey Elliot, Pedri, Tanguy Coulibaly, Adil Aouchiche, and Emile Smith-Rowe, and we don't have anybody in C or the bin, because it's pretty hard to put a wonder kid in there, isn't it? Because they're not really getting that many minutes in their squad. This concludes this episode of the tier list. This week's tier list, of course, being based upon some of the biggest breakout stars in football at the moment and where I think they rank amongst their peers. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like on it down below and subscribe to the channel with some great content coming out towards the beginning of 2021. I'm very excited to take the channel forward in the near future. Of course, this tier list, if you want to try it yourself, can be found in the description down below. If you do it, be sure to link it to me on Twitter or Instagram and show me where you put your players. You can follow me on both at MaxDJ Goodwin. It's the same username for pretty much all social medias as far as I'm concerned. And until next time, which will probably be the Premier League reaction show on Monday, I will catch you later.